Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, U.S.-Japan Perspectives on Space Sustainability. I'm Jeff Foust, Senior Staff Writer at SpaceNews, and I'll be one of the co-hosts of this webinar being held in partnership with the Secure World Foundation. Most people understand in general the concept of space sustainability and know why it's important, a good thing, but questions is what exactly does that involve? Why is it specifically important? What can be done to improve space sustainability? The purpose of this webinar is to examine that from the perspective of two leading spacefaring nations, the United States and Japan. Why do both countries feel that it is a priority? How have the government and space agencies taken action to support solutions? What innovations is the industry pursuing and why? And what more can be done to collaborate? The discussion that we're going to have over the next hour with this panel is something of a prelude to the Secure World Foundation's 6th Summit for Space Sustainability, which is being held in just a month's time, July 11th and 12th in Tokyo. And so we have a panel of representatives from the United States and Japan, from both the public and private sectors, to talk about that. Let me briefly introduce our panelists before we get on with the discussion. Ellen Gersten is the Deputy Associate Administrator for NASA's Office of Technology, Policy and Strategy, or OTPS. She provides leadership related to the management and operations of OTPS. She also supports the Associate Administrator in providing data and evidence-driven technology, policy, and strategy advice to NASA leadership, engages with the technology and space policy communities, and oversees the Office's Space Environment Sustainability portfolio. Dave Hebert is Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Astroscale U.S, which provides on-orbit services for the U.S. government, partner governments, and commercial operators around the world. It is part of Astroscale, which is developing innovative and scalable solutions across the spectrum of on-orbit servicing. He's previously worked at the Aerospace Corporation, MITRE Corporation, and the U.S. Geological Survey. Masami Onada is currently director of JAXA's Washington, D.C. office, representing the Japanese Space Agency in the Americas. Throughout her tenure in D.C., she has supported the development of U.S.-Japan space cooperation, from Japan's participation in the Artemis program in 2019 to the signing of the Pressurized Rover Implementing Agreement just this April, with the announcement of lunar landing opportunities for Japanese astronauts. Issei Shinohara is Vice President and General Manager of the Aerospace Department at Mitsubishi International Corporation. He leads Mitsubishi's defense and space business in the U.S., which includes undertaking business development with the theme of creation of space projects contributing to solving Earth's challenges. So all very important dealing with space sustainability. As we go over the course of the next hour, we encourage you, if you have questions, to submit those through the chat. We're going to devote about the last 15 minutes of the webinar to audience questions. So if a question comes to mind, please submit it through the chat at that point, and we'll bring it up towards the end of the webinar. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to my co-host, Krystal Azelton, who is Senior Director of Program Planning at the Secure World Foundation, to lead the first part of this webinar, which will discuss the why of space sustainability. Over to you, Krystal.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. It's great to be here with you today. Secure World Foundation is very excited to be hosting the 6th Summit for Space Sustainability this year, Tokyo, Japan. Our co-host is the Cabinet Office from the Space Policy Secretariat of the Government of Japan, and we actually hosted the very first one in Washington, D.C. We've hosted them in London, New York, and online. And this year, we really wanted to dive into Asia-Pacific perspectives. But as you said, we also wanted to start with an exploration of why the issue of space sustainability and how it's being treated in the U.S. and in Japan, to sort of what everyone's appetites for some of the more in-depth policy discussions that we'll be having when we're in Tokyo. So I invite everyone who's listening to this to join us, either in person, if you can manage. If not, we'll also have an online hybrid capability during that. So diving in, I want to look, as Jeff said, at the why of space sustainability. It's easy to get caught up in the how and the what, and especially for those of us who work on this day in and day out. But it's also really important to take a step back and to understand what the drivers for space sustainability is. Why is it actually important that we maintain a safe, secure, peaceful, sustainable space environment? I think a lot of us on this, among our speakers and probably among our audience, we're space geeks. We think this is fun and exciting and interesting. And so to us, of course, we need to do those things. But the reality is there need to be stronger drivers. If we're going to have good government policy, if we're going to have investments, if we're going to have a strong industry, we need to really look at the benefits of space. And so I'd like to turn first to Ms. Onada with a question for JAXA. So JAXA, in support of the government of Japan's stated implementation plan, for instance, for the Sustainable Development Goals, has very much focused on bringing the benefits of outer space exploration and utilization equally to the present and future generations. Can you tell us why JAXA feels that space sustainability is such an important part of this goal to achieve sustainability on Earth?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, and thank you, Krystal, for the renewed focus to the Asia-Pacific area. That's very welcome, and also for holding the summit this year in Japan. We will do our best to make it a great summit. Yes, so as I said, in a nutshell, I think if we want to sustain the Earth's environment, and if we cherish sustainability of humanity and our life on Earth, and then if it follows that our society and life is so intertwined today with space technology that we all know, that will logically follow that the space environment also has to be sustainable to sustain our life on Earth, whether we focus on the Earth's environment itself or the humanity, the prosperity of humanity on Earth. Indeed, a number of JAXA programs are under the SDGs action plan of the government of Japan, and the Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs. And for instance, our greenhouse gas monitoring satellite GoSat series, forest monitoring, we have a system called Foust that we work with JICA, a foreign development cooperation agency that we have in Japan for forest monitoring around the world. Global precipitation mapping, we have a system called GSMAP, and as well as building projects in collaboration with emerging countries such as microsatellites deployment from the International Space Station. So all this, we established the basic policy on sustainable development goals to accelerate our contribution to achieving these goals. And so, like I said, outer space activities are not specifically mentioned in the current 17 goals of the SDGs. However, we believe that sustaining our activities in space while protecting its environment is essential for the future of humanity and for the sustainability of societies on Earth. So JAXA wishes to further promote sustainability of Earth and space through our expertise and partnership together with the global community. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Masami. Now I want to turn to Ellen with NASA. So NASA shares this goal. A lot of the research and development and operational activities at NASA are in fact devoted to many of these same topics. So I thought you could tell us a little bit more about how NASA supports the use of your Earth observations, your models, your derived information and data to advance sustainable development in line with the SDGs, but also other global initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Krystal, and my appreciation to both you and to Jeff for hosting this event. You know, I think it's such an important question because it really speaks to the central mission of NASA as an agency. Our mandate, when you go back to the Space Act, is to support peaceful and scientific purposes by using our unique vantage point from space to increase our understanding of the home planet, to improve lives, and to safeguard our future. And I think all of that is so closely tied into this discussion around sustainability. And so when I think about the work that NASA does, we're there providing data as well as models and other tools for research purposes. And much of that is actually used to drive decision-making. And so we take that role very seriously, and we have several different programs in place to support this. And so I'd like to call out two examples. The first is the work that our Earth Action team within the Science Mission Directorate does. And they provide support and funding to help institutions and individuals all around the world make better decisions about our environment, food, health, water, and safety. And so many of the people on the call may be particularly familiar with our SERVIR program, which works in partnership with leading regional organizations worldwide, including in Southeast Asia. And the purpose of SERVIR is to help countries use the information that's provided by NASA's Earth-observing satellites and geospatial technologies to manage regional challenges, things like food security and water resources, land use change, and disasters, which are all really, really closely tied in to the United Nations SDGs. And so while those example was looking down, I think there's also an important role that NASA plays when we look at the debris environment around Earth. And so they're thinking about the work that our Orbital Debris Program Office does. And they're really this international leader in conducting measurements of our orbital debris environment and developing the technical consensus for adopting mitigation measures to protect users within it. So things like our ORDIM model and our LEGEND model really help operators worldwide understand what the debris environment looks like, and helps project what the environment may look like in the future so that operators can make informed decisions as the space environment evolves. And so these examples really, I think, speak to how NASA can go and make its information widely available to help drive decision-making, not just within the US, but also globally. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. I think that's a great point about how there are many kinds of decision makers and they need different types of data, and it's going to require a lot of different kinds of inputs that we already have and ones that we want to grow, and then we need to ensure that there is that the threats to those inputs and data are protected. So thank you for that great summary. I want to now turn to our commercial representatives on this call. I'm particularly excited to welcome Issei from Mitsubishi Corporation, an organization that has a strong presence here in Washington. But as a global business with 8 business segments, and for whom space activities are a very small part of that business, I wanted to hear your thoughts and your unique perspective on this issue. So many of us interact, I think, daily with space companies that do space, and that's what they do. But I really wanted to hear from you from this perspective of a company that does a lot of different kinds of things and is trying to bring those space space activities and information and data into other areas. And so how do you feel your organization and others can more fully realize the benefits of space activities and data here on Earth?
Thank you, Krystal. First of all, thank you very much for having me today. Such an honor to be here to discuss about the space sustainability. And to the Krystal's question, I think one of unique characteristic of Mitsubishi Corporation is our extensive global portfolio that covers many industries, such as oil and gas, mining and power and agriculture, urban development, and more. And as Krystal mentioned, one of which is a space business that I'm involved in. And I believe this is a kind of strength for us to proceed space business. Because for the space industry to fly, it is crucial to ensure that space capabilities are effectively linked and connected into solving terrestrial industrial challenges. And I think this is really important. And from this perspective, I believe there has been and still is an insufficient understanding among, space players about real terrestrial industrial pain points. And in the meantime, industrial players also lack an understanding of space capabilities, which I see as a kind of significant issue or could be a bottleneck for the market to grow. And to that aspect, by combining our experience and the capabilities in space and also in other industries, we can bridge this gap and take a role in transforming these space capabilities into the concrete solution to industry. So by doing that, we believe that we can help to realize more the benefits of space capability and activity for the space. That is my thought. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's so exciting to me to see and hear how we can make that case, how we can help industries adopt space technology. That I often say that the opportunities are limitless, but the path towards actual adoption is much more complicated and complex. And so it's exciting to see a company as well-rounded and prominent as Mitsubishi Corporation taking such a strong interest in this, whereas you have both the technical expertise, but the connections throughout various industries. So thank you for that. I now want to turn to Dave from Astroscale. So it's almost like the exact opposite type of company. So you're not only a space company, but you're a space company that I like to think of as the subset of sustainability companies, those who are actively trying to address some of the challenges that we're going to talk about in the next section. So I kind of wanted to go back and actually hear from you about what drives a company like Astroscale. What helped establish the company? What is the ultimate goal that you are trying to work towards?
Thank you, Krystal. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on. So let me go back in the story of our founder, Nobuo Okada, who, as he tells it, was experiencing a midlife crisis and trying to determine kind of where to take his career next after a very strong background in finance and IT. And he recalled a handwritten note he had received when he was at space camp as a teenager from Japan's first astronaut, Mamoru Mori, and the note read, "Space is waiting for your challenge." And that was an inspiration for him to begin exploring a new career path in space. And the path that took him on was a variety of space conferences, because of course that's what you do. You go where everyone's gathered to talk about this. And what he observed was debris was this topic that kept getting discussed. And yet when it came time to discuss solutions, everyone sort of threw their hands up and said, well, we don't know what to do. And what's more is we don't know who should be responsible for this sort of tragedy of the commons dynamic. And essentially Nobu said that's not good enough. And so he founded Astroscale first with the kind of driving force of something better has to be done about space debris. But that background of finance and business sense, I think, lent itself to his very kind of wise establishment of three pillars for the company: policy, technology, and economics, because he knew that this was not just a technological problem. And in fact, Astroscale made investments very early on in policy and policy expertise, which is somewhat unusual for a space startup, because Nobu knew that the path to sustainability had to be paved through policies, regulations, and laws that held operators in space accountable for sustainable operations and enabled the development of the technologies that would make that possible, right? So today, Astroscale is dedicated to a vision of the safe and sustainable development of space for the benefit of future generations. And that manifests itself across the realm of on-orbit servicing. We want to shift space from a culture of what has been historically and traditionally single use, right? You build a spacecraft, you launch it, and you operate it as if you will never touch it again. And when it runs out of fuel or it malfunctions, it just becomes a piece of expensive and potentially very dangerous debris. To instead a circular economy where we build and launch things with servicing in mind, with the extension of life, with the extension of operations, with safe and responsible disposal or recycling in mind. And we would argue that all of human ambition in space, the things that we're planning now and the things that we haven't even thought of, are only going to be possible if they're built on a sustainable foundation of on-orbit servicing, and more broadly, the in-space servicing and assembly and manufacturing capabilities, or ISAM capabilities, that are sort of represented more largely across industry and across the sector today.
Thank you, Dave. That's such an interesting. I actually didn't know that about the Space Camp, a part of Astroscale's founding story. And one of the things that you said that just really struck me right there is building industry around policy, tech, and economics, right? So many space companies focus almost exclusively on the tech, and then struggle when it comes to the regulatory environment that is required of them, which is what Secure World, as you know, spends a lot of time on, or vice versa, trying to figure out the economics. And I'm sure you have your challenges there too, but thinking of a company along those three lines, I think that's a really insightful way to think of it in terms of how we're actually going to bring that benefit, both to the space environment in your case, but more broadly to Earth. Well, thank you all to the panelists for helping me sort of establish this baseline of why do we care about this issue and what are we doing in space that matters, and what are some of the issues to tee up as we delve a little bit more into the topic of the what and how of space sustainability. So let me turn it back to my co-host, Jeff, to take us from here.
Thanks, Krystal. Yeah, now we get to do the easy stuff here. How do we deal with space sustainability? Before that, I do want to remind people that if you have questions that come up over the course of this discussion, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. We've already had a few questions coming in, certainly room for more, and we'll spend about the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar with audience questions. I wanted to turn to you, Ellen, because it was just about 2 months ago that NASA released its first space sustainability strategy. And I thought it would be useful to start off with, for those who may not be familiar with the strategy or had forgotten it in the last 2 months, provide sort of a recap of what's in the strategy, what's the purpose of the strategy, and what NASA is doing with that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So our strategy came out in April 2024, and it's specifically looking at sustainability in Earth orbit. We intend to release future volumes thinking about sustainability in cislunar space, on Earth, and in deep space. But we focused on Earth orbit right now because we realize that this is a pressing issue. And if we don't address how the debris environment around Earth is changing, it could severely limit what we do in the future. So when I think about the strategy, it was written really from a NASA perspective, even though sustainability and space sustainability is a global issue. And it really focuses on specific advancements that NASA is able to make by leveraging our mission as a science and technology organization. So we really wanted to lean into our role as a global leader in developing those best practices and studies and models and technologies and tools that really enhance space sustainability and enable a comprehensive study of the space environment. So the strategy itself includes 6 goals, and I thought it'd be helpful if I ran through them very quickly and encourage everyone to go to the NASA website if you haven't had a chance to look at it. It's nasa.gov/space sustainability. And so our first goal is to develop a framework that's intended to help us think about how safe is safe enough. And when I say that, what we're really trying to do here is create an entity relationship model that would capture different types of metrics and models for thinking about technical risk, economic risk. There's also policy considerations, operational considerations, and other factors that really influence the decision trade space if I'm an operator and trying to decide what to do. So that's goal 1. Goal 2 is to improve real-time decision-making through innovation and improvements. And here, what we really want to do is enable a range of approaches depending on the particular situation operator might find themselves in, using a combination of remediation, mitigation, and characterization and tracking options. And so we think that there's a lot of opportunity across the board in all of those. Our third goal is to enable and demonstrate debris-related technologies and then transition them to outside entities. Fourth, really speaking to NASA's role, we're not a regulatory agency, but when we think about policies, there are certainly NASA internal policies that we want to update based on how we see the environment changing and what we see our role in, and also to enable some of the other activities called out in the strategy. And we also want to enable research into different economic and policy tools that help incentivize space sustainability. The fifth goal is for us to continue collaborating both domestically and internationally with a wide range of organizations. And we see a lot of opportunity to continue to share best practices and procedures and models and data and tools. And so really appreciate JAXA as one of our partners in this and look forward to continuing those conversations. And then the sixth goal is really to wrap up everything else that I had talked about before by establishing a new organization that will provide focused leadership within the agency for day-to-day coordination. And so this organization, many of you may have seen the job on USA Jobs. So we are actively in the process of creating what this team or this organization would look like and thinking about what government and implementation and policy roles this organization or this position would have to really bring together all of the different parts of NASA that are thinking about space sustainability and do it in a more strategic and holistic way. And so even though, I talk about these as 6 different goals, they're really quite interconnected with each other. And so this list is not intended to be you do 1 and then you do 2 and then 3. And we're also already undertaking actions to implement many of these goals. But with that said, we view the framework as really being foundational to make sure that we're using a data-driven approach when we think about what makes sense for the subsequent goals. And so for those of you who may have caught Pam Melroy's remarks at Space Symposium when she announced the strategy, really talked about not jumping to technology right away, but thinking about what technologies make the most sense based on what we learned through this process. And so we're still starting out on volume 1 and then have the future volumes to come. So more to come as we move out on this, but really appreciate all of the conversations around this and really recognizing that it's going to take partnerships to implement this.
Thanks. Maybe one quick follow-up is you mentioned that this was rolled out at Space Symposium a couple of months ago. Any sort of updates in terms of the progress NASA has made in working on these various goals since then, or maybe things to keep an eye out for in the months to come?
So I think the biggest thing that's out there is obviously this position for the Director of Space Sustainability, which we're actively working to fill right now. And, probably won't surprise people, right? But if you're familiar with the work that my office has done, for example, we recently released a report that looks at costs and benefits of different approaches to dealing with the debris environment, looking at remediation, mitigation, characterization, and tracking. There's also work being done in other parts of the agency, like Space Technology Mission Directorate. So they put out calls for proposals for remediation related technologies. So there's a lot of work right now that's already underway and more to come.
Thanks. Masami, maybe you can provide an overview of what JAXA is doing in space sustainability, particularly in programs like the commercial removal of debris demonstration program.
Yes, thank you for asking that. So the government of Japan does focus really on sustainability in thinking about the overall space policy. It does carry a lot of importance, as you will have seen in one of the G7 discussions that we had in the past, that there was a very long for such policy outcome document about space sustainability. We do, as one of the efforts, focus on a project that's ongoing that you just mentioned. That's the commercial removal of debris demonstration, CRD2. And I believe Dave can explain more in detail later, of course. It is a very new kind of a project in 2 ways, I would say. One is that we tried to have a relationship with the industry where we, JAXA, buys the services from them. And doing this in this area, I think, is quite a new approach. And also that this is a program to specifically to try to remove our H-2A rocket second stage. It's a huge chunk of space debris. And we are cooperating with Astroscale to do this. And so there is 2 phases now. We are in phase 1 to demonstrate that we can approach to the non-cooperative space objects, which is in this case is the H2 rocket second stage. In the second phase, we will try to demonstrate the actual removal technology, but that's still to come in the future. So now also I think this whole effort being done by a Japanese company that has global presence, and also it has launched, therefore, the spacecraft from New Zealand by a US-based company. So this is all very, very global, and I think it's such an amazing global initiative that we're trying to undertake. Another example is the risk avoidance assist tool based on debris collision probability, and that's abbreviated as RABBIT in short. It's a tool to implement quick, safe, and appropriate collision avoidance, and you can access that by registering through our website. And so we do try to develop these tools, try to have more people engaged in space sustainability, be more educated on it, and to train people to be able to experience how these kind of tools will work for collision avoidance. So all in all, we're trying our best to support the government initiatives by real R&D and technology, and we'll continue to do so. Thanks.
Thank you. Curious now to get some industry perspectives. Dave, I thought I'd start with you. Astroscale is uniquely positioned here because you have a presence both in the United States and Japan. And maybe you can talk about, from your perspective, the similarities and the differences, perhaps, that the 2 countries are taking when it comes to space sustainability initiatives.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. So I think first, it's helpful to sort of think of the components of kind of a successful exploration of space sustainability to the realization of operations and capabilities that make space sustainability a reality, right? So there's that policy path we already talked about, policies that and regulations that are focused on responsible behavior, and the policies and regulations that are focused on advancing the technologies and capabilities that will make space sustainability a reality, namely in on-orbit servicing and ISAM. Then there's the funding of demonstrations and other experimental technologies that are going to show us, can we make this work? And Masami gave a great example that we are very happy to be partnered with JAXA on and add CRD2 and our spacecraft ADRAS-J, active debris removal by Astroscale Japan, which, as she mentioned, is a world's first demonstration of end-to-end debris or unprepared object, really, if you want to think about a bigger picture, approach and inspection. And that ability to approach and characterize something is really kind of the first step to any of these other operations, right? So the funding and the commitment and the partnership on a single mission like that's this chance that JAXA is taking opens up so many other possibilities, right? So this notion of funding and experimentation is really important. And then finally, the programmatic year-over-year commitment to building these capabilities into space operations for the long term, right? And so in addition to JAXA's great work there, Ellen laid out, from a policy and position perspective, the awesome work NASA is doing on a sustainability strategy, on identifying a position for someone to be responsible for that, right? That's paving that policy road. And really what we need, if space sustainability is going to be a reality, the fastest way that we believe that is going to happen is by the adoption of these capabilities and the use of these capabilities that allow for sustainable space operations. That's it. That's the fastest way to make this happen. That's why our founder, Nobuo Okada, is so urgently driving the notion that we need to make on-orbit servicing a routine capability by 2030, because that is the most practical and direct way to make space sustainability a reality. And we need all those pieces, the policy pieces, the demonstration and experimental pieces, the programmatic funding to make that reality happen.
Great. Maybe just one quick follow-up. We'd mentioned the CRD2 program and ADRAS-J. Is curious, maybe give an update on how ADRAS-J is doing.
Doing well. Still pursuing the client, the debris object, the upper stage. Should have more to share here in the not too distant future.
Great. Looking forward to hear that. Issei, sort of the same question for you, looking at it from the perspective of a Japanese company handling U.S. operations, comparing how the two countries are approaching space sustainability from your perspective.
Well, I think, I can say both governments are quite aggressive and put themselves into, strong commitment toward space sustainability. And, like Masami mentioned earlier about I think a good example for Japanese government initiative for space sustainability is that CRD2, and that's demonstrate well organized and provides appropriate funding to foster technological development to achieve space sustainability. So I think that's a good example how Japanese government is working towards space sustainability. And in the meantime, U.S. I found a couple of the good example. I think to achieve space sustainability, I think SSA capability is a critical component of that. And to that, it has been transferring the management of civil SSA and STM capability from DoD to DOC, Department of Commerce. And that's actually encouraged to take advantage of private sector technology and enjoy more rapid technological development by private forces. I think this is a very effective way to accelerate the needed technological development to achieve space sustainability. So by having those examples, I think both governments are really going that way and showing the strong commitment toward space sustainability. That's my view.
I'll start with you, Issei. Is sort of this next question is, you already touched upon this a little bit in your response, but what sort of topics do you see as the biggest priorities in terms of advancing space sustainability? It could be things like improved space situational awareness, space traffic management, development of active debris removal technologies, policy and regulations. If we had to prioritize, what would be at sort of the top of your list in terms of addressing this space sustainability issue?
Thanks, Jeff. I think in terms of technology, I believe the advancement of all related technology is necessary to achieve space sustainability within certain time frame. But if I were to prioritize, I think that this is kind of relating to my formal comments, but I think that the accurate and timely understanding the situation of space environment could be the kind of foundation of all space sustainability related activities. So in terms of that, I can say, improving SSA capability is the most crucial. So to that point, the mentioned movements from DoD to DOC is, I think, light way going forward. By enhance that capability by utilizing the quicker response of private sector capabilities more effectively. Yeah, that's my view.
Right. Dave, sort of the same question for you. What are your top priorities?
So I'll give you one answer with two parts, Jeff. That may be cheating. So the first part is, as I mentioned or alluded to earlier, the development of rendezvous and proximity and docking technologies, right? So the ability to safely approach, interact with other objects in space for the purposes of providing services and assembling things, manufacturing things. And so the more that goes into the development of those capabilities, the faster we're going to realize sustainable space. I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out the Department of Defense and the work they've done in investing in things like refueling and recycling, two capabilities that we are partnered with Space Force on, for example. I'd also be remiss if I didn't shout out NASA for creating the COSMIC Consortium, a NASA-led organization of government and industry to explore possibilities of on-orbit servicing technologies. And then the second piece of that single answer is the adoption of on-orbit servicing and ISAM capabilities into routine space practices. Again, this is the fastest way to get us to the point of achieving a sustainable future in space.
Thanks. Masami, what is on the top of your priority list?
So as JAXA, we live in a happy world that we are the implementing agency. So our top priority, of course, is R&D to demonstrate the technologies and build best practices, so that would provide the solid technological foundation for the international discussions or data sharing, interoperability, or creating norms and rules. And one of such efforts being CRD2. All of our programs are geared toward that and supporting, in this case, sustainability. We do, in that sense, join the discussions at COPUOS, IADC, ISO, Converse, all of these forums, to be able to support the decision makers by our R&D in technology and the projects that we deliver. So I really do hope that we can continue this. Also, we'll do everything in our power, including trying to support the space strategic funds that we are implementing starting this year. To support the Japanese mainly industry, but to support the overall in space industry. So our focus, R&D, technology, to contribute to the policy.
All right. And then Ellen, obviously you have the space sustainability strategy, but in terms of what you see as most important in terms of being able to implement that.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think, part of what's so nice about the strategy is it started from a place of defining what our challenges are. And what I think most of them boiled down to is there are so many different ways to think about sustainability and to measure, if you will, how sustainable we are. But there's not really a common standard for any of that. And the approaches up until this point haven't really been holistic. And I think that we're getting to the point right now where we really recognize that we need to think more holistically to really think about how space traffic coordination and mitigation and tracking and remediation all play together. And there's also a piece that we're very sensitive to, which is the role of the operator in all of this, and what trades might they be making for sustainability versus mission success. And so really want to lean into supporting that decision making so that there is a better understanding of that trade space, really supports operators, and to do it in a way that's coordinated, not just within the US government, but internationally as well. And so we've already talked about some of those venues that exist. And I think that's really important because it's those kinds of opportunities that help us to come together and learn from each other, and come to a place where we may have some more unified approaches going forward.
Great, thank you. We've got a lot of great audience questions in. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them, but going to try and take as many as we can. A good first question to start off with. Is there already a virtuous circle or feedback loop on sustainability between the US and Japanese government agencies and their respective corporate space mainstays like Mitsubishi and Astroscale? So are you seeing that sort of that feedback loop in terms of improving space sustainability? I'll leave that to anyone who wants to jump in and start off the discussion there.
So I can kickstart that. So yeah, of course, we do, as I said, cooperate, participate in international discussions in many fora where we discuss sustainability, not just space debris. And if there is a feedback loop already, that's a great food for thought, actually. We do discuss in many different arenas, although a positive feedback loop, maybe we should really keep working on, of course. In terms of work with NASA, we have scientists and researchers, engineers also collaborating together with respective industries, of course. I think the feedback mostly would be at the moment one-to-one bilateral through the projects, or multilateral through the various discussions. I think it's a great question to ask ourselves, how more, not just organically, but to systematically work through on sustainability for such a good loop to happen.
And I would say, obviously NASA's role in this is limited because we're not the regulatory agency, but we certainly provide our information to the FCC as they're coming up with the rules that US industry would need to follow. And so, certainly from my perspective, what I see is a growing recognition on the part of industry, both operators as well as different companies who are interested in offering their services. There is definitely much more attention and awareness to the issue of space sustainability, and much more interest in engaging, especially with the regulators, as they may update the different guidance to make sure that people have a voice and know what's going on.
All right, great. I've had a couple of questions come in, sort of looking at this from a more broader international context. In particular, recent discussions at the UN about concerns about placement of weapons, including nuclear weapons in outer space. And let me bring up the question here. What impact on space sustainability broadly do you see coming from these recent UN efforts, especially given the lack of success in some of the Security Council debates in recent weeks?
Why do you keep hacking at us with all these more challenging questions? So, well, the short answer is I'm not in the position to answer that one specifically. But I was looking at what do we how do we relate with the multilateral committees, like also UN COPUOS, but also IADC. The one you referred to is the one in Geneva, more on arms control. Broadly, the discussions in the UN, in the civil sense, we do interact and worked to get the LTS guidelines, long-term sustainability guidelines, together. There was one question that was asking about the definition of sustainability. And it does talk about that it is defined as the ability to maintain the conduct of space activities indefinitely into the future in a manner that realizes the objectives of equitable access to the benefits of the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes. So I think all of this UN, what they do very well is documentation, definitions, and the multilateral process is always a time-consuming one. But we hope to be able to still work towards having a multilateral, I guess, more of a converged idea of where we want to go with sustainability as a whole of the international community. So that would be my long non-answer to the question.
And maybe I'll just amplify that a little bit, because I agree with everything that Masami was saying. And I think there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to space sustainability in particular, to think at a global perspective. And that's certainly something that we're doing, having conversations with JAXA, but other international partners to really understand where they are when thinking about space sustainability. There's also a lot of opportunity that exists for the U.S. to collaborate and coordinate through the Department of State. And this particularly comes up with questions around the Outer Space Treaty. And something that my office is also working on are different types of questions, especially policy questions, that would need to be addressed on a global scale. And that could take lots of different flavors, including how do you promote innovation when it comes to remediation, and where are there international constructs that could be limiting that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it requires this collaboration.
All right. Maybe a question, just a related question for Dave. We're talking about multilateral efforts. We have the Zero Debris Charter that Issei has sponsored, had a number of signatories. I think Astroscale may be one of the companies that has signed on to that. Maybe talk about what benefits do you see for an instrument like that to promote space sustainability?
Other things popping up, blocking me from unmuting. Maybe my computer's trying to tell me something, but here goes anyway. Yes, Astroscale UK specifically signed the Issei Zero Debris Charter. And I think I'll build on an answer I was considering for the last question, and that is those sorts of initiatives, conversations at the UN, the fact that, as Masami said, there was such a significant amount of the documentation of discussion at the G7 dedicated to space debris and space sustainability, they raised the level and the reach of the space sustainability conversation from something that I think everyone here on this panel knows is usually a very niche conversation to one that ends up in mainstream media and mainstream conversations. And while it presents challenges as our industry learns how to deal with hard questions about the way we do things, on the whole, it's a very good thing for us to have greater visibility for the public and to be thinking about how to better solve problems in space.
All right. We're talking about the public and private sector, and the two agencies we have here are civil space agencies, but obviously organizations like the U.S. Space Force and its Japanese counterparts play a role here. What sort of collaboration do you see working with them on advancing space sustainability?
Would that be for me?
For you, for Ellen, for whoever wants to jump in.
So the government of Japan and the United States, we have entered into an agreement on SSA cooperation, space situational awareness cooperation, some about 10 years ago, I guess. And with that, a framework of U.S.-Japan cooperation under that, and also by the direction of the MOD of Japan, JAXA is undertaking our SSA program And this, of course, does contribute to space sustainability in a way. And we are therefore carrying out together cooperatively well, Japan, JAXA has come into an operational phase recently for our SSA program, and we have radar and optical observations terrestrial at the moment, and we do have also space-based observations planned at the moment. So all of this, I think, is possible through our bilateral cooperation, and will certainly be a contribution to space sustainability.
And within the U.S., the types of partnerships that Masami was talking about are really between the Department of Commerce and Department of Defense, not with NASA, but we do collaborate quite closely with the Department of Defense, especially when it comes to the orbital debris mitigation standard practices. As government operators, we believe it's very important to work with each other on that. And then obviously there's lots of other government agencies within the U.S. That have a stake in that. And so working through interagency mechanisms to make sure that we're all aligned.
All right.
I will add that for a company like Astroscale, the only way we can be serious about pursuing our vision of the safe and sustainable development of space for the benefit of future generations is by working with national security space operators. They're in many ways the most influential operators in space, right, in a few different dimensions. And Space Force itself has said that it is a means to an end, not an end in of itself, and that end is the securing of space for the flourishing of human activities, for commerce, for exploration, for science. And so they themselves have sort of characterized, I think, I'm editorializing a bit, but sustainability in their own way. But regardless of whether you call it sustainability or not, security and sustainability, they have to go hand in hand.
Great. Thank you very much. There are a lot more questions that we could talk about. Fortunately, we're near the end of the hour here. So I hope that this webinar is giving you sort of a taste of the topics and the discussions about space sustainability, its importance, and how to achieve it. That will be the subject of the Summit for Space Sustainability next month. So I thought Krystal could maybe spend just a couple minutes here at the end, sort of giving a preview of what to expect at the conference next month. To close this out.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. And thank you so much to our really great speakers for laying out a lot of different aspects of this. And I actually want to touch, as a way of doing that, I want to touch on one or two of the questions that we didn't get to. And so one of the questions was saying, how do you address the fact sustainability can be defined a lot of different ways, depending on the industry or the culture, or even just who you're talking to within the industry. And to a certain extent, at Secure World, we don't try to do that. We think that the answer is going to be multifaceted. I get asked a lot, well, if we have this big problem with the space environment, what do we do about it? Well, the answer is we have to do a lot of things. We have to figure out the right regulations. We have to make sure international law is where it needs to be. We need for industry to have its own voluntary best practices. We need for more academic research because there's things we don't understand very well, right? Like we need all of the actors to come together in a lot of different ways. And there isn't one solution. There are many solutions. Another question in the chat asked, is space weather considered a sustainability issue? And I would say absolutely. Secure World 100% considers that a sustainability issue, both from a benefits perspective in terms of how it affects services on Earth, but also, as we all saw even just a few years ago, from an SSA and conjunction analysis perspective, that space weather can affect those things. So there's a lot of things we didn't even touch on here. And that's part of why we started this conversation about benefit and looking at why we care about space and why do we need to make sure that we achieve this. And to a certain extent, it's to make sure that we don't make some of the same mistakes that we made here on Earth from a sustainability perspective. And so the event in Tokyo is really going to be, I like to think of it as a locally driven, locally hosted regional conversation with some incredible international experts as well. We will be looking at a huge variety of topics. Active debris removal, which we touched on today, is another big one that we'll be looking on there. But we're also going to be looking at regional coordination around SSA and understanding the space environment. And as different governments like the United States, Japan, Europe do different things for their SSA, how does that affect other actors, and what are they looking at? What are their needs? We're going to be looking at the intersection of topic you all just touched on, which is security, commercial space, and civil space, and really trying to understand, especially at the governance level, how can we make sure that those things aren't separated and that we're actually having the conversations we need to, because space doesn't differentiate by who launched the satellite, right? We're also going to be looking at the role of commercial industry in space. And finally, we're also looking at exploration. Now, we're not coming at it from a long-term sustainability of exploration. We're coming at it in this particular instance from a partnerships perspective. As the world has changed, the path towards exploration has changed, and there are new sustainability questions that come from that. You know, it's not just about being a launching state. It's not just about having a very government-heavy driven program. A lot of that's being done in concert with commercial entities, both in low Earth orbit and then as we look further to the cislunar environment. And so what does that mean? What are the new sustainability questions? Like, we talk a lot about how we understand debris is the problem, but do we understand these new and coming issues? And so we'll be looking at all of those things. And as I said in the beginning, we do have a hybrid capability. We will also be posting it online for those of you who don't wish to be up at midnight here on the East Coast of the United States. And then for those who will be in Japan for either our partners organizations event, the Space Tide Conference, or for ours, we absolutely welcome you to join us and our co-host, the Cabinet Office of the Space Policy Secretariat of the Government of Japan. If you have any questions, we consider this a community event, so please reach out to us. Thank you so much, and thank you again to our speakers.
Yeah, thanks to our panelists. Thanks to Secure World for partnering on this, and thanks to you in the audience for tuning in. We'll have a recording of this webinar up on spacenews.com not long after this is over. So if you want to come back and watch it again, or tell your friends what they missed by not tuning in live, there you'll have it there. So once again, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see some of you in Tokyo next month. Bye-bye.